Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ep.3 from Ahmed Talks, and I have the honor to have with me Tori Hanson. Hi, Tori.
Hi, Ahmed. Thank you for inviting me to join.
Yeah, of course. And I looked into your podcast, The Knowledge Shop, and you mentioned that 500,000 podcasts don't make it to episode 2. So here we are at episode 3. So I think that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining in. I really appreciate it. A small background about Tori. She worked in marketing and advertising, and she did some work for the New York Times. And then she decided to start her own thing. She started her own podcast, which is called The Knowledge Shop. You can check it out on Spotify or Anchor. She also is the founder of the New York City Entrepreneurs Coworking Group, which I attended one of the networking events that she hosted, and that's how I met you. So, Tori, I guess I'm going to start. My first question is about one of the books that you mentioned on the podcast, which is Grit from Angela Duckworth. And there's one thing in particular that I want to ask you about and just get your opinion about it. She mentions that talent times effort equals skill, and skill times effort equals achievement. What is your understanding of that statement?
Wow, I feel like I'm in the middle of an exam. I mean, I think with all things, you can't just be good in one area, can you? It doesn't matter if you're the smartest person in the room. If you don't actually apply yourself, you're not going to get anywhere. And I think in life, quite often what happens is some of the most naturally talented people don't necessarily fulfill their potential because they don't apply themselves. And actually the people who are quote unquote the underdogs are the ones who come up and succeed because they were working on something that they cared deeply about and were really passionate about. And so for me, I think that's what she's trying to get at, is like, you can't just have one skill in one area. You have to be able to tap into a number of different things, and that's where you achieve your real potential.
Yeah, I can also see it in a slightly other way as well, that like talent by itself is not enough. You don't need to have
Exactly
talent, right? So if you're passionate, if you have some conviction about something that you want to do, if you apply yourself in the skills with time and effort, you will eventually achieve it. But I feel like if you have the talent in a specific area, it could be a catalyst in a way to propel you to where you want to go. So tell us a little bit about what made you leave the corporate world and start your own journey. Well, what's the drive behind that?
Yeah. I mean, I think looking back, I've always had this entrepreneurial drive. I remember and I'm saying this as like the least creative person out there, but I remember I must have been like 7 or 8. And I'd just been given a paint set for my birthday or Christmas or something. And I decided that I was going to become an artist. And I was like painting all of these pictures, and I had this bird book. And so I was like recreating all of these pictures of like kingfishers and robins and sparrows and who knows what. And I set up this little stand outside the front of the house selling these beautiful masterpieces and just flagging down random people to come and buy them. I think I maybe sold one to a very, very unsuspecting person, but I think that was my very first taste of entrepreneurship. And I just went, I'm going to give it a go. And, fast forward through to the real career, I guess, I've just always been somebody who loves learning, who loves trying new things. When something new comes up, I'm like, oh, let me try and figure that one out. And I guess I was lucky because media is actually the industry that I ended up in, and is so dynamic and constantly changing. It really allows for that. Mm-hmm. And so I started in advertising sales, moved to marketing, like you mentioned at the beginning, and ended up in this really unusual position at the New York Times, where I was in effect like a CEO of like a number of different businesses there, because what they were trying to do was to figure out how could they really deepen their engagement with their readers, with their subscribers, outside of just a print product. How can you do that a bit more in the real world? And so initially I started running a travel company, then it moved into a wine club, school, working with the online store. And I frankly, I loved it. I loved, being given a blank piece of paper and somebody saying to me, hey, here's a problem, like now go and solve it.
Fix it,
around that. But it sort of got to the point where I was there for like 7 years, and it got to the point where I just knew that I was investing all this time in building somebody else's great product. But it's a bit like, when you're younger, you can stay at home and you can live in like a really nice, safe family home and be with your parents. But at some time you
True.
need to move out and maybe go tread your own path. And so I just sort of started thinking about that. And at the same time, I was enrolled in an MBA, which was at a school in the UK, which specialized in entrepreneurship. And so all of these, like, I guess, just lines were starting to converge. And yeah, it sort of got to the point one day where I was like, I can do 2 of these 3 things, but I can't like try and do my own thing and study and have a full-time job. And so, yeah, so I guess that's the journey and where I ended up saying, okay, right, I'm just going to give it a go.
Yeah, no, I mean, that sounds really awesome. I guess a question to add on top of that is, do you think an MBA would help someone who wants to become an entrepreneur, especially that if you come from a place where you don't have a background in business?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you think an experience is enough?
I think it really depends. So I went to University of London and chose their business school, which was CAST. Now they've just renamed it to Bayes. And it's one that really does focus on entrepreneurship. And I think they're very set up for that. And other universities are very good at that as well. So I think if you know that you want to be an entrepreneur and you're also like, well, maybe I want to have some form of accreditation behind me, then I think that's a great way to do it because you sort of get the best of both worlds. That being said, I definitely don't think you have to do it. I mean, you see entrepreneurs all the time starting, maybe it's somebody who starts selling artwork at 7 and just keeps going. So yeah, I definitely don't think you have to at all. I think most of it really is what you make of it and the network. And I think there are lots of, especially nowadays, like great networks and communities out there. I mean, frankly, that's why we're talking, isn't it? Because we just met at some other networking event. So I think with most things, it's just what you put in is what you're going to get out of it. It's not just going to come to you.
Got it. Obviously, you hosted multiple events and you've met a lot of people, ambitious entrepreneurs, who just, they're testing the water, exploring what they can get out there. What kind of personality traits you've noticed in people that could lead them to success and achieve what they want?
So I'm going to answer this in 2 parts. Firstly, actually, the research I did for my MBA focused on how do I think accelerators are going to evolve moving forward. And part of that, I spent time talking to people who worked at a number of different accelerators as well as founders themselves. And one of the questions that I was asking people was, what do you think makes a successful entrepreneur? And quite often you hear, they've just got to have grit. They've got to just really push themselves out there. But actually, the number one thing that came out across everybody was that you needed to be humble. You needed to have humility. And
wow, okay.
I think that, maybe with hindsight, it's very obvious that you need that. But I think it's underrated and not spoken about enough. Because you quite often get people, and this is where I'll move into, the founders that I speak to at my events and just within the entrepreneurial community generally, quite often you get those who will come in and they'll just steamroll it and they'll just like walk up and like start pitching and they'll do like a 30-second pitch.
Right, yeah.
And if they don't think that you can help them, they'll just walk off. Right. And they don't really spend enough time actually remembering that at the end of the day, we're still humans, we're still animals, and frankly, people by people. So the more you actually get to know somebody and the more open you are to connecting them and giving before you ask, then I think that sets you up for really long-term success because it says, okay, it's not just about what skills do I have right now. It's, ultimately you're portraying the fact that you can be a really strong leader and manager and team builder. And without that, you're not going to build a successful company.
Wow, that's a great answer. Kind of gave me the goosebumps. Yeah. And you also mentioned something about the importance of showing your ideas in public, right? Showing your work in public. I did get a book. It's like a 50-page book called Show Your Work. I have not read the book, but just looking at the cover of it, it's like, okay, I mean, I want to start this podcast. I want to start doing my own music stuff. But it's all in private. I'm like, what am I gaining out of this? How do I know what I need to improve? what can I get? What kind of feedback I can get from the people? So I need to show my work. So that's why I got back into social media, which is something that I wasn't. I thought it was a waste of time at some point, but no, you can actually leverage it and harness it to build yourself and show your work.
Yeah.
So what kind of advice would you give people who are hesitant to show what they're doing at the very early stages of their MVP, for example?
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think a lot of, especially first-time founders, or not even founders yet, just entrepreneurs, I think is a phrase that some people talk about. They're very scared that somebody's going to steal their ideas. And to be honest, that was sort of my thinking too. And also there's a second part too, which is you don't want to look stupid. And you don't want to put something out there until it's like perfect or until you really know what you want to do. But I actually learned, and this is the big shout out to Andrew Hutton and Rahul Brambach, who are building Day One, which is an accelerator that I joined in like March of last year. And they were very much from the beginning, you build in public. And actually their whole sprint, their whole program was designed around that. And so every week you would post something and then get feedback from it. And that was actually the best thing for me, because I think, you spoke about it, like you're getting feedback straight away. You're starting to learn about what resonates with people, what doesn't resonate. You can test your messaging. And building in public can mean so many different things. Building in public doesn't even have to mean social media. It can just mean talking to people about it. You go to a networking event, you speak to 30 different people at the networking event, and you give them each a slightly different story, and you just watch them. And you just see, you can tell whether somebody understands what you're saying or not very, very quickly.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I think that for me was really important. And also then the piece about, the confidence area. It's scary. And that's basically a lot of, if you listen to my podcast, or people who are listening to this podcast go and listen to mine, a lot of it is pretty open, and I'm pretty vulnerable about, okay, right now I'm really bricking it. And like, I'm talking and it's really scary, but building is scary. And there are times where it's amazing and there are times where it's not so great. And I think the more you recognize that that's just the norm, and you get out of your own way and you don't let your fears hold you back, the faster you make progress and the further you will get. And so all of those things combined, I think really then go into, this concept of manifestation, which some people believe and some people don't. But the more you put stuff out there, the more you share, the more open you are, the more likely the universe, frankly, people will come up and support you and send things your way.
Yeah, I kind of really agree with that statement, because I feel like it's all a mindset kind of thing, and thinking long term and not worrying about the short term gratification, which as humans, I think we are kind of like programmed to seek short term gratification. And not the long-term one, because the long-term one is going to take time. It's going to take effort. It's very uncertain if it's going to happen anyways. And I think uncertainty is one of the biggest challenges in the entrepreneurial journey. I did mention it on my previous episode that one of the books called The Messy Middle. It really like talks about the journey of what happens in the middle, like the failures, the pivoting, the multiple MVPs that fail. And I find that pretty interesting and insightful, because it gives entrepreneurs an angle and a drone's perspective on the challenges that entrepreneurs face, because we only see on the media the failures and the successes, and the successful stories. We don't know what happened. We don't know what led to that. And I think you're doing a great job with the knowledge shop, going through that journey and being vulnerable in it and speaking openly about the fails, the ups and downs. And I think vulnerability is strength, period. And I'm trying to adapt that in my life as well, openly to the public as well. It's just who we are. And if we show who we are as people, I think people can resonate with that and help us with our passion and ideas.
Yeah. I think it's, it's about courage. And actually just before I came on, I was listening to a podcast that I love called The Innovation Show by a guy called Aidan. And he was interviewing somebody whose name escapes me, but it was basically just talking about incorporating courage into your everyday life, and that you don't have to, he didn't use these words, but in effect what he was saying is you don't have to suddenly wake up one day and jump out of a plane, about little steps. And the more you do things which are courageous or that are scary, the easier then the next step becomes. So you just start with like small steps. And the more you do that, the more you sort of normalize things. And I think as a result, you look back and you go, bloody hell, I did end up jumping out of that plane, but like I'd never have done that on day one.
Yeah, no, I agree. And they say, like, I read in that book, The Messy Middle, jumping off the plane. It's like jumping off the cliff and building your parachute as you go down.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much sums up the entrepreneur's journey. Okay, going back to the co-working group that you created, what are the benefits of like people like myself, for example, who are still in a corporate job and kind of interested in joining other like-minded people in that space? How would that help someone like myself, for example?
Yeah. I mean, I think firstly, I started that group because I think it's really easy to just get stuck in your head. And the more you can meet other people and just sort of share some of what you're thinking, the more you get that energy and sort of motivation to keep going. And so I think anybody, frankly, regardless of whether they're an entrepreneur or not, would get a lot of benefit out of either joining mine or joining other groups like that, where you can just meet new people and just help keep you moving forward. I think for people who are early days, especially a first-time founder, it's a great way to just learn more about the industry. Because like a lot of people that I'm talking to are what I would call corporate converts. So they're coming into entrepreneurship later in life. They didn't have a traditional entrepreneurial background. So they didn't necessarily go to university to study it. They didn't go to like Y Combinator as like a 18, 20-year-old, 22-year-old, whatever. They've had a career and now they're coming at it and they're like, okay, what's a VC? Like, I think I want to be an entrepreneur. I've got an idea, but actually, how do I take it from 0 to 1? Like, how do I raise money? What's a deal sheet? What's a data room? What's all the other terminology that you don't know. So I think going to an event like that is a great way to understand just the industry like that, to understand what support mechanisms are out there, the different accelerators that you can join, to learn more about who's maybe building in your space, like just what you need to do to try and prove some of product market fit as well. Again, you don't have to build the whole thing on day one. There are different ways of testing it. Whereas I think a lot of people think, and it goes back to the confidence thing, that when you launch, you have to have the perfect product, but the perfect product doesn't exist, does it? So I think there are many, many benefits for people going to one of these events or an event like it, regardless of whether you're full-time, part-time, or still thinking about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm definitely going to attend some of those events as well, just to put myself out there and see what I can learn from as well. I think it's very beneficial to interact with like-minded people. Last question I have is, we know that resilience is very important to succeed. And in your own opinion, like what fuels your resilience when to a point where you stay resilient and you avoid getting burnt out? Because I feel like sometimes the mind works faster than the body. And we sometimes lose that connection with being resilient, if that makes sense. Like, for example, I wake up every morning, read 20, 30 pages of a book so I can finish the book as soon as possible. But then I have my job, then I go to the gym and I do other things. But at some point, I stop listening to my body because of my mental resilience. So how do you balance that connection?
Well, I mean, it's definitely a work in progress. And I think that part of it is knowing that quite often we know what we need to do, but we don't do it because it doesn't, appeal to us that day. It's like everybody knows that they need to work out, but it doesn't mean you do it. Logically, smoking and drinking alcohol are bad, but it doesn't mean you don't do it. So I think, at least recognizing it in the first instance is a good step. And so for me, it sort of goes back to what you were saying before about social media and, this sort of instant gratification piece. I think it is really hard to stay focused, to stay resilient, to not burn out when you do have a million different notifications on your phone and different Slack messages popping up all the time. And so what I try to do, I turn off all the notifications on my phone. I delete most of the apps that aren't sort of productive. So like all of my social media apps have gone. I try really hard, especially if I haven't slept well, to meditate the next day because it sort of just realigns me. And I also so I work from a lot of WeWorks and I am coming at you from a WeWork phone booth, and a lot of them have like wellness rooms. So in the afternoon, if I can, like I'll go and take like a 20-minute nap, or just lie down and just recenter. And so I think that really helps. And then also, just getting out. And so that, I know I keep mentioning it, but that is why I started the co-working group in the first place, just so that I wasn't just stuck in my head. And
Mhm.
in some ways it's a form of therapy, like especially, so we run a number of different types of events. We have the bigger happy hours, and then we have like the smaller all day ones. And in some way, and maybe there's like 10 to 15 people in those, as opposed to like, I don't know, like 40 or 50 with the happy hours. And in some ways they sort of turn into like a form of therapy, because it's like, okay, what's front of mind for you right now? What are you struggling with as an entrepreneur? And you just put it out, and suddenly you see people in the room, just sort of their shoulders like dropping a bit more, and they're just starting to relax a bit because they realize they're not on their own. And so
Yeah.
again, the more you can normalize the challenges that entrepreneurs face and get it out of your head, then I think it becomes easier. But there isn't like a one size fits all approach. You have to do what makes sense for you, and use, as my mum would always say, the different tools in your toolbox.
Toolbox, yeah. No, that's amazing, Tori. I mean, that's very valuable and highly insightful. Do you have any last words for the audience?
I would say, I mean, everybody says this, but like if you are starting to, or if you've got an inkling that you might want to do something, just start, just throw yourself out there and put yourself in the situation. Go join some groups, talk to some people. It doesn't matter whether you've got an idea yet, but I still struggle with thinking that I need to have permission to do something. But if I was still waiting for that, like I wouldn't have started this group, and, wouldn't still be, we wouldn't have met, and I wouldn't have met a load of other amazing people. And so, yeah, so it's never too late. Like if you do one thing today, like what can you do in the next 10 minutes to support your entrepreneurial dreams? Or you can absolutely go onto the Meetup website and just Google, a meetup that's relevant for what you want to do next. Just make some sort of progress.
Make progress and execute. Don't overthink.
Mm-hmm.
I think overthinking is the main culprit here.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Yeah. Tori, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you guys on the next episode of Ahmad Talks. Thank you. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.